Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again from Film Fanatic headquarters. I hope everyone survived the latest storm of 2023. It was a little bit of a doozy. We had about a foot of snow yesterday. I wasn't able to upload any videos to the Film Fanatic page. My internet was down. I did do a video. I usually, I'm in the habit of doing a video every day. It's a lot of fun. My schedule, like I've said, I attribute that to the way I started changing kind of when and where I do the videos. I've been doing them kind of on a daily basis. I try to do it every day. I really enjoy doing it. And I find, I don't know, it's like anything. The more you do it, hopefully you just get better at it and you learn as you go and all those things. And I always look at everything as a work in progress. So the more I do it, the more I get used to doing it, hopefully, and it improves the quality of some of these videos. Trying to always bring the focus more and more back to what this whole channel is about, and that's the films, obviously, first and foremost. And then the last few months or so, the last few weeks especially, there's been more and more folks commenting on the videos, which has been really great. And that's one thing I really love, is just interacting with other people that are really into a lot of these films. And I cover all kinds of things. I try to bring a lot of variety, but I try to keep everything more or less focused on the main genres that I love, and that's science fiction and horror in the what is known as the exploitation world. It's such a fun. It's such a fun adventure, checking out these movies and discovering all movies that I grew up on, but then all of these other films that I've been discovering, and with like I said, with people commenting on the videos, there's been a few really cool folks that I've been in correspondence with, where they've made suggestions of films and certain directors that I have never seen before or have heard of. So that's kind of the whole point of it, is trying to discover some new things, and especially movies and directors that are kind of related to some of the things that I really love. So it's a whole lot of fun, and I want to continue on with doing the specialty shows, doing some variety, where I have the shows where they're focused on, not necessarily a movie, not necessarily a typical review or where I talk about a film, but, I try to mix it up with I did, some shows on soundtracks, film scores I really love. Also, how in this day and age, movies, how movies are affected by word of mouth, especially with the internet, combined with the critics, all of those things. When it comes to that subject, and I know, when you look at certain films that are now, like, say, regarded as classics, but at the time they were really berated by critics upon their initial release. But then, fast forward 10, 15, 20 years even, they find this huge audience, and those films now are regarded as classics. And, that was during a time when there was no such thing as the internet, and there wasn't a platform available for everyone to voice their opinion. People would obviously express their opinions, the public, but it would be in, more, more of an obviously more in a different light and in a different format, word of mouth, people talking to their friends or blah, blah, blah. But with the internet, it's very different, because people have to vent their, I think in general, people, just your everyday Joe, through the internet, you're able to really reach an audience, and you're really able to a degree, have a large group of people follow you. And a lot of people use the internet, especially with Facebook or Instagram, to highlight their business, or they might be a photographer, or they might be a model, or they might be involved with the arts to some form, to some capacity. So they use that platform, or those platforms, to obviously promote their work, and the content that they're putting out. And that really is a big plus. I think that's a really massive bonus of where people, you know, musicians, bands, artists, all those kinds of folk, they really can promote their businesses and really garner an audience, and a huge audience. And I've seen some people where they have these businesses that they, sometimes have like daily thousands of people checking out what's going on, or getting notified that they have this new product out, or that they have, or a band, say, has a new show. And it's essentially really amazing in a way, because you can reach such a huge audience. And especially if you're a musician who is, totally self-contained, and you're putting out tracks or albums, or if you're a filmmaker, whatever it is, you can reach an audience. And sometimes people will really spend that extra money or download your material, and you can actually make a profit. I know lots of people that have been able to do that, and essentially, using all those services for the artists themselves. It's all free. And on the other hand, you have people who are just, your everyday people. They might have this kind of wild persona on Facebook or on social media, and they really know how to, I don't know, instigate things or attract people to some degree. And or even to a less extent, people who use social media, which I feel is one of the negative sides, where they use it essentially as a diary, a personal diary. So they vent all of their, personal problems, all of, what, and then they also get they're in a place where they like to kind of stir a lot of crap up, and try to, confront people about certain things, get in arguments and about politics or religion or various social issues. And even those people, because of what they do, or because of how they present things, have this massive audience. So I think now, with, I was talking about, how reviews and negative buzz, how those things, are very much, come into play, say, when a movie comes out. There's a larger platform for people to garner up, say, a real positive, or to give something praise, or to give something, a real massive thumbs down. And I see how that does affect, particularly with what this channel is. I see how that does affect movies when they come out, word of mouth. Like, I mean, movies like, say, for instance, kind of extreme differences, but like movies like Terrifier 2, a small independent film. That movie was able to garner this massive, massive audience online through lots of buzz. In my book, those movies, I still haven't seen the second one, but I feel like they're a little bit overly hyped. But still, being said, those filmmakers and those folks who created that film were able to create this massive kind of following, and garner all of this acclaim, and actually make a huge amount of money. And that was all through the power of the internet. Other films that I feel have been really greatly affected for the negative, on the negative side, one example I could think of is, say, Halloween Ends. That movie was really severely affected by negative buzz, and I actually think it's a pretty good movie in some ways. Not a perfect movie, but I think it's actually I actually really enjoy that movie in a lot of ways, and I'm actually thinking about buying it on Blu-ray. But I think that movie was really not only, I mean, obviously it was pretty, it was definitely given a lot of negative reviews by, say, the press, but so many folks chimed in, and it was a very polarizing movie, and I saw how that affected and actually changed, people's views on, or it helped to make up their own decision as to whether or not they were going to see it in the theater or see it on in the in its streaming presentation. So those are like two examples I can think of, of two movies that were, you have a real small independent film, and then you have a really large budget film, and how both of those, one was affected incredibly, in a real negative way, and one was affected in a really really positive way. And not only the critics and things like that. Obviously, you have your the Guardian, you have you have Entertainment Weekly or Rolling Stone or Roger Roger Ebert, or any of the other critics that are out there. Obviously, they always have an effect on box office, and as far as how many people are going to go see the movie, they always have an effect. But what I saw in those two examples was how much the public's response affected those two films. And that's all. I mean, again, it's just my opinion, but I attribute that all to the internet through social media. And I see that as being this thing that's kind of unprecedented and very, very different. Movies that in the beginning of the show, that's always been a thing where I talked about certain movies that were not embraced at all by the critics, even kind of, despised to a degree, but were under a lot of scrutiny. Certain films that came out, but then later on went on to become, or now looked at as classics. Two movies I can think of, and again, this was all before the internet and people had, this platform, and where they're able to express their opinion, and for thousands of people, right at their fingertips. But two movies that I think of that are pretty good examples of that are would be John Carpenter's The Thing, and also Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Two incredible, horror movies. The Shining being probably my favorite Stanley Kubrick movie. I'm going to do a show on that at some point pretty soon. Just an amazing movie. And then also John Carpenter's The Thing, which is definitely my favorite Carpenter movie and one of the greatest horror movies ever made. But those two films, upon their initial release, were, for all intents and purposes, they were box office failures. They were not very. They were not really. They weren't embraced by the critics. They had a lot of negative reviews, and a lot of people didn't see those. Didn't spend the money to go see them when those films came out. And those movies have been around for now, close to 40 years. And both of those films now are regarded as just like these epic classics many, many years later. So, but I think now with social media, films like that, or close, or kind of in that area, are even more greatly affected by social media and just the general population. So it's an interesting time. So I try to do shows where I talk about different things related to films. One of my favorite things that I love doing is having guests on the show, and that's something I try to do quite a bit. I'm gonna, hopefully get some more guests lined up here pretty soon. It's been it's been a while since I've done any reviews, since I've had any guests on the show, but stay tuned for that. Those are all things that I love doing. That in that particular area of interviewing people is probably my favorite. I just enjoy that a lot. I learn a lot from having certain guests on the show and doing shows with these guests because I try to have people from varied backgrounds, whether it's they're an actor, an actress, or they've directed films, or they've worked on film scores, and so it always gives me a little bit of insight, and always hopefully get a I always get a little bit of a different perspective, and hopefully the folks that enjoy this channel, they might also have the same response. So it's a good time. But today's show, I'm going to talk about, speaking of John Carpenter, The Fog. This movie is just such a classic. One of my all-time favorite John Carpenter movies. I mean, what can be said? What cannot be said about this movie? This movie came out in 1980. This was probably the first movie of John Carpenter that I ever saw as a kid was Halloween, which is overall probably my favorite in the entire franchise of Halloween. I really love the franchise to a degree. Not as much. I don't feel it's as consistent as other franchises, but I really love, obviously, the first Halloween. I just think that is just that it's such an unparalleled classic. That was my first Carpenter movie. I really, really love Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. Those films are great. I love Halloween H2O. I think that is such an awesome movie. I recently rediscovered that movie. I just think that movie is such a kick-ass movie. I want to eventually buy that on Blu-ray. And I actually really like the last one that was directed by David Allen Green in the newer trilogy. Halloween, Halloween Kills, and Halloween Ends. And I see a lot of similarities and parallels between Halloween Ends and Season of the Witch. Those are my favorite movies in the franchise. That Halloween Ends is definitely my favorite out of the three more recent films, just because I feel like I felt like David Allen Green and Danny McBride, who wrote that film, and David Allen Green, who directed it, I felt like they really tried to shake things up a little bit. And I think for the most part, not a perfect movie, but I think for the most part it was pretty successful. And I think it was a pretty good experience seeing that movie. I saw it again. I saw it in the theater, and then I've seen it again. I saw it about a month ago. I watched it on DVD, and I kind of enjoyed it even more. So I'm looking forward to seeing it again. But so, like I said, the first film I ever saw of John Carpenter's was obviously Halloween, and then I would have to say, from my early recollection and seeing it as a little kid, The Fog was there too. I saw this probably within the same, probably like within this, definitely in the same time frame. And this movie was probably, I'd have to say, it was probably like the first supernatural ghost story film that I ever saw as a kid. And this movie always terrified me. I almost, to some degree, found this to be more of a frightening movie than Halloween, even though that movie is so great and so iconic. There's something about the ghost story aspect of this film and the atmosphere just so incredible. The cast was so great. Adrienne Barbeau, who at the time, Adrienne Barbeau is more or less known as like a scream queen. I've seen lots of interviews with her. I have quite a few movies where she was the star of. Like I did a movie review for Swamp Thing fairly recently. She's been in a whole bunch of movies, but in the '80s she made a whole bunch of horror films, and she even says that she was not at that time not a fan of horror films or slasher films, but she kind of got pulled into it, and she made a lot of money, and she was very popular. She was like a pinup girl essentially before that. She was also married to John Carpenter at the time, and she stars in this, and she is just drop dead gorgeous in this film. The other actor or actors in this film that I just huge fans of is Tom Atkins. Tom Atkins is another fabulous actor. He was also in Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, Night of the Creeps. He was in a whole bunch of really great slasher movies in the 80s. He was in Maniac Cop. He's such a great character actor, and he had so many great. I feel like in the late '70s through the '80s, he had so many great iconic roles in the kind of the horror exploitation world and in the low budget horror film in the low budget horror film world. Just great. He always has a great. I feel like he was also very underrated as an actor. I think he had a lot of depth. I think he could have been even a bigger star because I think he was legitimately a talented actor, but just fabulous, fabulous actor. Always been one of my favorites. And of course, Jamie Lee Curtis. This was her second movie that she was in. She went on to obviously become another Scream Queen, her first being Halloween, and she was in Prom Night. She was in a whole bunch of other movies during that time. I think another movie was called Terror Train. So many great movies. So her she also had a real reluctancy. She's always said in many interviews that she was never, really a fan of horror, but she got pulled into it, and it was a big success. She hit it hard. She had tremendous success, and it started her career. And she always talks about how she attributes her success, really to John Carpenter for getting her started. And just and the other film that I really love of hers that I haven't done a show on, but I'm going to, is a movie called Road Games, which is an Australian thriller. And I consider that to be kind of a low budget exploitation movie, but just such an awesome movie with Stacy Keach. Such a cool movie. That was a movie I had heard about for a long time, and I bought it last year on Blu-ray, and it's an amazing movie. And she did this all. She did a whole bunch of these films, all within the '80s, and also in a relatively short period of time, but just tremendous, tremendous. And also, Dean Cundy was the cinematographer. Dean Cundy is my favorite cinematographer of all time. He's done so many great films. He worked on all of John Carpenter's films. I just recently did a show, and I actually watched it the other night. This really great low budget horror exploitation movie, The Creature from Black Lake, which is such an awesome movie. And I just watched it again last night. Dean Cundy did the cinematography for that film as well, and he worked extensively in the whole exploitation world during this time. Even after having a big commercial break, or hit with Halloween, he still worked within that world quite a bit. Just so awesome, and he's my favorite cinematographer. And of course, John Carpenter did the music for this film. It also stars, which is amazing. It also stars Hal Holbrook. He is one of the a legendary one of the at one point probably in his career, one of the greatest working character actors and one of the greatest of his generations. He plays the priest. Definitely one of the greatest actors of his generation. But Hal Holbrook plays the priest in this film. In this movie, I just feel The thing that is so amazing about this movie is the atmosphere. It just has so much rich atmosphere that really elevates the whole kind of creep factor and the eeriness of this film. A few years back, they made a remake of The Fog that I believe John Carpenter produced, and I was not a fan. I didn't even get all the way through it. It just lacked all of those things I just mentioned. It was kind of a watered down version of this movie. But this movie is just so great. I love that it's so low budget and it has that real grittiness, that classic John Carpenter vibe, that kind of B movie, exploitation kind of flavor to it. But it's such a classic horror movie. This is definitely one of my favorites. My favorite in all of so many great films that Carpenter directed, but my favorite being The Thing. This is right up there too. I mean, it's obviously The Thing, probably The Fog, and obviously Halloween. Those are my three favorite. But again, it's hard because I really love Escape from New York too. That's such an amazing movie. But this edition of The Fog is really really awesome. They have there's hours of special features. They actually go. There's a really cool documentary where they go back to the original locations of where they shot this film, and I love that they actually use locations. This was the time before CGI and blue screen, so everything you're seeing, on the screen is, based in the in the practical effects world. So it has this great, which adds so much to the rich atmosphere of this film, which is just so tremendous. So I can't say enough about this film. This is definitely one of the greatest horror films ever made. I think it's easily one of the best John Carpenter movies ever made. A movie that where they've tried to replicate the magic again, or to try to give it a bigger budget, and for my money, it just did not work at all. But this movie is one of my go-to movies whenever I'm in the mood for a good ghost story. It's one of the best supernatural horror films of all time, and I can throw this movie on any time, and I just totally enjoy this movie so much. It's just so great. Amazing, amazing atmosphere. One of the greatest. So this is Jason Dean. Thanks again for checking out this channel, and we will see you next time. And please if you get a chance, check out this edition of Fog, The Fog from 1980, John Carpenter. It is the quality is just immaculate. So thanks again for everyone checking out this channel. Please like and subscribe if you like this stuff, and keep the comments coming. Thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.